One of the things that BION insists, which I find that people find difficult to, in my own practice, mostly in North America perhaps, and in Latin America where most of the people follow BION, but in North America, we have found that we're teaching candidates and training and so on, is something that is related to what BION used the metaphor of polyneurons, that is in the innate.
What? You're confusing me.
Virtues innate. Huh?
Epic poem by
Yeah.
the story at the beginning.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
Well, polyneurons is the pilot of Aeneas. Aeneas?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
How do you spell it?
It's here
Both.
in the book. It's in
Yeah.
What page?
page
It's in page
166.
166.
Okay.
So, and then he's, but he's very tired and sleepy. And then he's asked, will he give up the, how you say in English, tibong?
The rudder?
What was it, tibong?
The will.
The wheel, okay, the wheel. To give up the wheel, he's not willing to, and then he falls asleep, and then the whole is a disaster because it sinks the boat and the whole float. I mean, disappear and whatever. So he said that kind of a stubbornness that psychotherapists and psychiatrists and psychoanalysts would have of not giving up, for instance, the need to take notes while you listen to a patient. Or you need to remember past things in relation to the history of the patient, or to really have a history of the patient that is completely irrelevant because you're not going to use it, or to provide a diagnosis, which is dangerous because what? You're classifying a person that forever, so you're going to be something forever. There is no a capacity for the mind to grow and to progress, so that you could be different. So he got to the extreme to say you have to give up that stubbornness and be able to develop the discipline of to listen to the patient in a state of ingenuity, of complete empty mind. Because, like the Buddhists say, if you want to fill a container with water, all what you need is that it's empty. Because if your mind is saturated with desires and memories, then you might not be able to connect intuitively to the patient and be able to understand what's going on. He said, the greatest distance is now from here to the galaxies. The greatest distance is from communication to incommunication. How do we understand what the person is talking about? What is the person really saying? So this is completely logic. For instance, people insist even recording. So when you, usually in candidate, for instance, that record the session to present to the supervisor, is a defense to leave themselves out. And I always say, look, this is like pornography, because you really, I mean, an act of psychotherapy, in your relationship with your patient, there is a tremendous and important sense of intimacy. But there's nobody else but the two of you only. So when you record and you introduce in a third, it's like having somebody watching you, you know. It's like a trisomy, you know, like a menage or something like that. So you should be there with your patient, without nobody else, as much as you can. Because then you can really, if you have an empty mind, if you give up completely taking notes, or being interested in history, and you listen to the patient, like Reich said about the third ear, which is a similar, in some ways, about the notion that BION is presenting. If you listen in that state of, it's not a trance, because it's something like, it's like driving a car. I mean, at the beginning you think about how you drive, but then it's like the car drives by itself. You don't think anymore. Everything comes automatic. So you start the discipline, but you don't take history, you don't take notes, you don't classify the patient, you don't give a diagnosis, you listen in a state of having your mind completely empty, no memory. The memory is a form of saturation and contamination of the listening you're trying to have now from the patient, because you don't know if this patient that came today to see you is the same patient you saw yesterday, or it's going to be the same patient you're going to see tomorrow. It's like the Heraclitus River. You know, Heraclitus say that you never bath in the same river twice. So, I mean, if you want to know the composition of a river, I mean, more samples you take, more chances you have to know what's going on. But you have to use new samples, because if you use the same sample, you mention always the same thing. So there are simple things, really, that, but then it's very hard, because we are like polyneurals. We have been taught, mostly by psychiatry and psychology and this type of thing, I mean, how important it is to take note, how important it is to write the history, so that we are not willing to give it up. And this is the main problem, because then you don't listen to the patient, but you listen to other things, noises. Freud intuitively produced the couch. They say, well, because he was accustomed to do hypnosis, so the couch was there. This is true. But he was in front of the patient, or the side of the patient, and he was in the back. So intuitively, he reproduced really the same situation that you will see in somebody giving a conference, and a translator translated to a different language for an audience who doesn't speak the language of the speaker. And then you never see the translator. The translator, which is absolutely essential for you to understand, is completely secondary. It's hidden somewhere. So by putting a chair behind the couch, what Freud was reproducing was that, intuitively, of that position of the translator, because all what we do when we listen is to translate the manifest discourse of the patient into the latent one, meaning the patient is thinking aloud, and we're listening, and we try to see what is behind the words of that discourse that the patient is sharing with you, to know exactly what is the meaning behind that the patient doesn't want to know about. So we are really translators of the unconscious, really. And I would say the clinical problem is a secondary effect of psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis is only interested in making the unconscious conscious. But in doing that, many things happen. But I would say that usually side effects is not the main purpose of analysis itself, of psychotherapy. So then, if you saturate yourself from memory, then you don't know what the patient you have in there is a different patient. And if you have desires of curing the patient, of understanding, or whatever, you imprison the patient. And the patient will sense that, and will respond to that. And they will have two attitudes: or comply to you and provide you with what you want, or rebels. But then you are introducing a noise into the communication that belongs to you. For instance, I have this argument many times about something that is called multiple personality. And this is a very important issue in North America, not so much in Latin America. And it's the thing, now, I say that multiple personality is the consequence of a iatrogenic means disease produced by the doctor, a iatrogenic splitting, where a perverse interaction is created between the analyst and the patient. Because the patients are split. We are born in bits. I mean, growing mentally means to put our mind together. The purpose of analysis not only to help us to grow mentally, is to put our mind together. So we can address parts, but with the purpose of putting them together, not to preserve the splitting. So when the patient is talking about, in order to use a defense of a splitting the mind, it will use about a part of themselves that it don't belong to them. You really have to interpret, making the patient aware that he's talking about himself or herself. But if you go and follow what the patient is saying, and insist in the splitting of the patient will find a desire in you, because it's done. my patient have 5 personalities. Oh, might have 20. Oh, might have 25. I mean, there's a competition in psychiatry about how many personalities your patient has. So then more the psychiatrists get, more of the analysts or whatever, get interested in all the personalities the patient is providing you with. More you get interested, more personalities is going to provide you with. Until the end, I mean, it's a crowd. So, and this is what happened. Many people here believe, and they say, well, yes, you don't believe, because I have seen it. Of course you have seen it, but it's a consequence of somebody doing that to the patient. Anyway.
Is that still in vogue? Because
Eh?
is that multiple personality issue in vogue? To me, in my reading, it's died out, or it's gone away. 10 years ago, or more, it was quite the thing. But today, I don't hear of it anymore.
Is it more dissociative?
Identity
They give a
disorder.
name, they get
Yeah,
a sophisticated name.
They gave it another name,
Oh, that's right.
dissociative
Yeah.
identity
They're
disorder.
hiding on me.
Yeah, they're hiding from you. But it's still going on.
No, okay.
Not only that, they have a society,
Oh,
and they have books.
oh.
Yeah, and I have friends that we really, by the time we get together, we have big arguments.
Okay.
Anyway, so there is a meaning, an important meaning of knowing, understanding the.
I think this thing about multiple personality disorder is related to your concern about diagnosis. It's people who focus on phenomenology, like the picture, rather than trying to understand what is going on. They don't listen with the third ear. They listen only with the 2 ears.
Well, it's the influence of psychiatry.
Yes,
Psychiatry
I
has a
agree.
tremendous influence on psychoanalysis here, mostly. And then, because it's powerful money-wise, laboratories can buy you easily, because they produce millions of dollars by recreating all disease with new names, and all medicine with new names.
Right.
In my time, what is called attention deficit span, because and psychiatrists love to give a letter because they make you, make more interesting, then you don't dare to ask because you appear ignorant. This CMDB, what's that, So they have letter for everything.
Acronyms, yeah.
The acronym, yeah. So, and then it was called hyperactivity.
Yeah.
But now it's have a sophisticated name. They were giving amphetamine. Now they use Ritalin, but it's the same thing. And that change involved millions of dollars.
Oh, more than that, sure.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
BION, and he was talking about at the beginning when he say that he have something I quote here, that Cogitation is a book, BION, where his notes were written there, and then it was published posthumously by Francesca, his wife. And then many notes, but you can get you can understand a lot about BION on those 2 books, Cogitation and Memoirs of the Future. So he talked about, about you can fall asleep or whatever, you have to be rested. You listen. I don't really agree with that. I can listen. I mean, if I'm tired, I'm going to fall asleep regardless. But if I'm not, I can listen without having been in a trance. My mind is blank. And that's automatic. Once you do that and you do that, it's automatic. You listen without having nothing in your mind. And then suddenly it pops up. I was listening to a patient the other day, he was telling me some dreams. And then he said, he was mentioning about going out with somebody, but he mentioned his name. He said Anthony. And then he was going with Anthony, some place and whatever. But then I don't know why I stayed with the name. I mean, some thing happened that you don't know why, and you, like BION said, you pick that up with an act of faith. You have to trust yourself. I mean, you don't let it go. If I stick into the, I say, well, Anthony, what does that mean to you? I say, well, Antonio, as an Italian guy, Antonio is my name. I said, well, then you're talking about yourself. So, and then of course, that was very meaningful for him to understand that he wasn't very friendly with himself, that he didn't treat himself very nicely, So, but what induced me to think about the name, I don't know. It could have been many things in the dream that he related. So if you pay attention, you will see that that happened to you when you listen carefully and having nothing in your head, that something called you, it's behind your back, you know. So and that is intuition. Now, in the previous chapter that you can read on your own, which I like very much, that chapter before this chapter of the of O, I refer to the three phases of the preconscious. I say everybody has the preconscious that they deserve. You never talk about preconscious, but I think that it's an important space to consider. Now, there are three situations that are similar. The interaction between the mother and the child, the interaction between the analyst of the psychotherapist and his patient or her patient, and the interaction between the unconscious and the preconscious. They are similar. In the mother is what BION called the reverie. Reverie means daydreaming, meaning that a mother will pick up what the patient is saying. In an act of reverie, you mean intuitively, without thinking. And I will show you something here. I don't know if you have seen, have you? This is an elephant having you have seen it?
Yes.
You have seen it?
I've seen it.
What is an
Elephant having
a baby?
a baby?
Yeah.
No, I saw a mare having a foal.
No.
No, this is special.
Yeah. Okay.
I want to show because if this, you can see the intuition of an animal. So if an animal have intuition like that, I mean, we have it too. You know, so there are things that cannot be learned or thought. They are there. They are there as a mystery. We are a mystery. You know. So I want you to see that. But then, so then, the baby is a natural being born like that, full of nature. So interact with the mother, and the mother has to use her intuition to capture whatever the baby is expressing or whatever. And she has to do it with that capacity to listen, with her memory and desire, just listen to the child. And mothers are very good at that. Mothers are very good intuitively to know what is going on with the child.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Good. The second is that we analysts have to listen the same way to whatever the patient is to express it unconsciously, in the same state of reverie, allowing the intuition to take over and to appear. And then in the preconscious there are two possibilities. Which is, one is if the preconscious is handled by, used by beta element, mean elements that are not good for thinking, it's like a screen of beta element that will sense the unconscious contents in a Freudian way, as something forbidden, something bad, something dangerous, something threatening, something frightening. So it will repress it, it will reject it, it will not want to know about it. That repression, when it increases, it will overflow the consciousness, and we have a psychosis. So psychosis is a consequence of such an amount of repression that the content of the unconscious overflows and takes over the consciousness, and then, you know, it's like endometriosis. Endometriosis is when women, instead of menstruating to the outside, menstruate inside, it becomes a tumor. It's invasive. So, but when the preconscious goes to, I'm represented to the two opposite situations. When it's taken by beta elements, with a screen of beta elements, or when there's a contact barrier, meaning when there is the presence of alpha element. So alpha element is completely the opposite. Welcome. It welcomes the content of the unconscious and uses the unconscious as an organ of thinking, intuitive organ of thinking ahead of us. So, depending on the attitude of the unconscious, of the preconscious, in a similar way, depending on the attitude of the therapist to the patient or the mother to the child, we can either be forbidden or receptive. Let me show you, and I mean, perhaps we can read here the O from here. I need a nice voice of somebody who's really volunteer.
O, ultimate reality. Letter taken from the word origin, probably related to the same term used to designate the center of the Cartesian coordinates that correspond to
I have a feeling that he could also come from O. I mean, O could also come from, saying O.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Okay. Well, sir, just quickly, how did you get origin? There's evidence?
That's something I
you thought
gathered
about?
myself. So.
Oh, okay. O as in Eureka?
That's right.
Yeah. Probably related to the same term used to designate the center of the Cartesian coordinates that correspond to the point where the x and the y-axis intersect. However, it could have also been taken from the concept of origin in Zen Buddhism. BION defines O as the thing in itself, or that which is immeasurable, the absolute fact taking place in a session, in an artistic creation, or in a state of illumination, and because of its own nature, it cannot be known. There is a possibility for O to become known only if the transformation of O is capable of combining the invariants present in such a way that its communication to others becomes feasible. In order for this to happen, two things must take place. Memory and desire must be abandoned, and a state of union with O, which BION calls it a state of at-one-ment, must be allowed to take place. O is continuously becoming O from this moment, just like the present time would not be the O of later on. This is why it cannot be known, because if you know it, it is not O any longer. Or in other words, just when it is no longer. It can only be when it is not. It is not a position or a condition. O is just a possibility that could be or could not be. In classical theory, O would be equivalent, although different, to the concept of insight as a sudden revelation of the truth, either in the analyst, the patient, or ideally both. He also refers to the existence of some kind of a function that permits the precipitation of a constant conjunction, which is identified as a constellation that would act as some sort of catalyst to enhance fusion or at-one-ment with O. This fusion can become public in several circumstances by means of interpretation during the analytic
We
session.
don't say that interpretation is a public act, because
Okay.
you're making something private public to
Yeah.
conscience, to the patient.
Yeah. The two of you being the public, yeah. So by means of interpretation during the analytic session, or through the feeling experienced by some artists when faced with their own O, who are able to transmit their work to the audience that listens to music or watches painting their piece of work. It is as if O will become visible through the invariant that results from the thing's transformation, something that can be observed in Descartes' communication about the transformation of a piece of wax from the honeycomb. Yeah, I like that one. Excuse me. In religion, for instance, Meister Eckhart expresses that the good head evolves to a point where it becomes apprehensible by man as the Trinity. The Godhead, sorry. I say good hit. O could be interpreted as the unconscious continuous becoming. For instance, no matter how dense our experience might be, we will always face unknown dilemmas about some of our dreams. Do you want me to continue? Okay. There cannot be a genuine becoming of O based on falsehood. O is the absolute truth of any object. The analyst cannot identify himself with O. Instead, he must be it at one-ment. And in this way, he will be able to know the events from the evolution of O. Perhaps O could be better understood if one thinks that it represents the ultimate reality, be it good or bad. BION makes a distinction between the patient's O, OP, and the analyst's O, OA. To ask in a session, for instance, what is OP, implies asking what the patient is talking about. I therefore postulate, says BION, that O in any analytic situation is available for transformation by analyst and analysand equally, and hence concludes in psychoanalysis any O that is not at the same time common to both patient and analyst, and therefore is not available for the transformation of both of them, must be ignored and considered irrelevant, for it would not be feasible to investigate it in any way.
Because you know why?
They're not ready?
That's right, but you induce resistance.
Yeah, oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, if they're not ready, you
Yeah.
either induce resistance or something worse.
It had to be a good timing.
Yeah. No, I thought of that when I read that. That makes good sense, yeah. The reaction of some patients to O can be primitive, with material belonging at the same time to rows A and B of the grid. For example, a patient who comes to analysis with the unconscious purpose of denying the existence of the analyst, trying in this way to deal with the dread of the analyst's absence, TPO. The patient's presence in the session is evidence that the patient knows that the analyst is present, sensuous level or beta elements, row A of the grid, A2. But at the same time, the patient acts as if the analyst is not there, corresponding to row B, column 2, B2.
Well, you know it very well now. You have no problem because you're supposed to know everything about the grid, eh?
Right,
So you
we
have
do, right?
no problem at all to know understand exactly what BION is saying there.
Well, B2 is alpha but defended, right? Alphabets which are...
Very good, yes. That's what it is.
Oh, okay. BION has considered O as different from the patient's reaction, conceiving it as a definitory hypothesis belonging to column 1 that could be defined as containing the following negative characteristics. Its existence as a dweller or inhabitant within a person is irrelevant, regardless of the individual being God or the devil, because O is neither good or bad. It cannot be known, loved, or hated. It can be represented by terms such as ultimate reality or truth. I had a question. When I was reading that, I was thinking, is that not the message the mother is supposed to give the baby? No matter what you are accepted.
Unconditional love.
Yeah. So O is it equivalent to unconditional love? O just is.
It's the truth.
It's the truth, it just is.
I mean, a mother would love a baby unconditionally.
Yeah,
You
okay.
see, unconditionality is provided by two persons to you.
Yeah.
One is your mother and the other.
Sorry, one,
I say two persons can love you unconditionally.
yes.
Your mother and the 3 years of your life, because afterward, I mean, they start to
Yourself.
demand. And yourself, yeah.
Right. And that's the purpose of analysis,
That's the purpose of analysis, yeah.
to love oneself. So it's a narcissistic process?
It's so
A healthy-
narcissistic.
Yeah.
It's so narcissistic that it's completely away from you.
Can you explain that?
Well, it's so much immersed that you abandon yourself.
you abandon what you are normally in the day, or you,
Narcissism is the incapacity to conceive you as a total object.
okay.
So you're always in correlation to other, always in correlation to other. So the other infer in you. So you're in union with some. So you know yourself. You're always the expression of somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the narcissistic structure, for instance, you have to become aware of the countertransference in order not to become a narcissistic structure that reacts with the transference of the patient as a one thing, as a one body. But when you become you, then you stop being you.
You are.
Because your you-ness, I mean, to become yourself, it means to abandon you.
I have a funny feeling I'm not going to get that one tonight unless someone else can
Um,
explain it.
But no, anybody want to explain?
To become you, you
I
abandon
mean,
you.
look, if in a narcissistic structure, it means you know yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You, for instance, is I need for you to think I'm a fantastic guy. I cannot think that myself on my own without needing you to say anything about me. But unless you say I'm fantastic, I'm good for nothing.
Okay.
So I need narcissistically depend on you telling me that I'm worth it.
Yes. Yeah.
Because on my own I cannot achieve that.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. So if I achieve it on my own, I don't need you to tell me.
Oh. Okay. Okay.
Okay?
But then, how are you abandoning yourself?
Because I don't need for you to tell me, so I don't make the demand on you to have the responsibility of keeping me feeling well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if I abandon me, then I can be aware of you as you are as a person,
Okay,
and not as my own need.
Yes.
You are my need, and instead of
Yeah.
you being you and me being me.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now
Okay.
I understand. Thank you. That was very helpful. The most or the least one is to be it, but to identify with it is a way of getting away from it. Oh, is this sort of similar? And is often an expression of psychopathology in the form of delusions of grandeur. In classical psychoanalysis, inaccessibility.
I think you can really, you can leave that there.
Okay, that's fine.
Because you got the principle. Any question about that? Is that clear what it means?
Do you want that left open or not?
No. I want to read something from here in page 173. As a woman in her 40s who is married and works as a teacher was having some difficulties with her husband, which reflected signs of childhood rivalry with her older and only brother. She started this session referring to problems related to her husband's management of an autistic child he had from a previous marriage, and who was now living with them. She felt very critical of the way her husband was handling the child, as well as the continuous rebelliousness exhibited by the child toward household rules. She was sitting up and wearing a pink sweater to which I did not pay special attention. She had a dream. She was attempting to have a meeting with 3 other women, another teacher from her stepson's school, a psychotherapist, and a neighbor. At this point, I had the image somewhere in my mind as a peripheral vision of this woman wearing pink sweaters like that of my patient. However, I paid not full attention to this matter until she had finished the dream. She realized that there was no tablecloth on the table and decided to look for one, but became aware that the walls were all covered with papers written by her husband giving her foolish direction. Then she went upstairs to fetch the tablecloth, but there was a step missing in the stairs and some chair blocking the way. She suspects that this is also the work of her husband. At this point, I realized I had in my mind since the beginning of her narrative of the dream that all women from her dream were wearing pink sweater as if they were her clones. I think that they represented her feelings of omnipotence, of wanting to be mother, teacher, and therapist of her stepchild, and at the same time, that's a good thing I said stupid. At the same time, that she ridiculed her husband, brother, a mechanism she might have used as a child in order to compete with her older brother, and make the whole interpretation around the color of the sweater, which I think represents O. Now, we have to pick up O in order to change it into K. Jump from O into K in order to make an interpretation.
I was thinking about this dream, and the approach from a more classical perspective would be to focus on the defense mechanisms typical in dreams, in this case repetition. So the person is represented more than once in her own dream. And the dreamer is represented more than once in her own dream. And so that if you look at it from, the idea that dreams use certain defenses, condensation and repetition, and things are presented in the concrete form. So rather than saying, an abstract idea that I want to be everything to my stepson, the dreamer has concrete pictures of a psychotherapist and a teacher.
But this is the way the unconscious work. I mean,
yeah, except that you see the issue of the use of reverie, which you are using. I think that a person who had a different psychoanalytic orientation, in this case more classical, might get to the same or similar interpretation in a different way.
Oh, like what, for instance?
Well, looking at the repetition and
repetition of what?
Okay, I am saying that a dreamer can represent herself in more than one form in the dream.
Yes.
So it's a repetition of the dreamer in the dream, as she's the three women in the dream, and you don't use reverie to get to that. You use your knowledge of dream theory that was presented by Freud. The use of repetition.
Which is repetition.
Yeah.
Repetition compulsion you're talking about.
No. Repetition is a defense mechanism in dreams, just as the representation by the concrete and condensation are defense mechanisms typical of dream.
And how will that help the patient, you were to say that?
Well, you're not going to say that. You're going to say to the patient, well, it seems to me that you are represented more than once in this dream. Perhaps that tells us something about your wishes. And then you will say, it seems to me that you wish to be everything for your stepson.
Okay, but we're saying the same thing.
Yes, I know, but it's from a different direction.
But you see, there are issues about the unconscious, for instance, that you can question between BION and Freud. Mm-hmm. I mean, he didn't say that. I don't think he got into too much trouble about arguing about Freud, but you can get from reading his conception. For instance, but we will get into something else here. Displacement and condensation, of course, is a something mechanism the unconscious really has to use, because the unconscious is using image in order to use as a narrative and to produce concept, pictograms, so that he has to condensate in order to, so then any image is pregnant with meanings, also symbolical meanings. But when you come, for instance, to other concepts of dreams, like there was condensation, displacement, and the
repetition, and representation by the concrete.
Okay, so representation by the concrete is that the unconscious use image to represent something. So they're concrete, but they are pregnant with meaning, and abstract meaning. I mean, when we interpret a dream, we go from the concrete to the abstract.
Yes.
So But I think that is, we can use that to understand perhaps how the dreams are formed, but it's not practical from the point of view where you offer the understanding of the patient. So, I don't know. I mean, for instance, the same thing with psychopathology. Defenses are the consequence of how the ego, what the ego uses to defend itself from unconscious matters. But these are usually linked to culture, you know, to a family culture or to the culture where you grew up. You use North American use more obsessive defenses, where the Caribbean people use more manic defenses. So the defense itself, the psychopathology, I find more descriptive, that can be used for the purpose of providing an understanding to the patient. Practical. I think BION is very practical. Perhaps because Freud was attempting to provide a meaning to psychoanalysis at a time when people, even himself, didn't know what dream was about or what the unconscious was about. But BION psychology is a more practical one. It's what do you say to the patient in a way that you make the patient aware? I mean, with the purpose of, by making the patient aware, reduce the amount of anxiety and so on.
Okay.
I think there is a chapter here on the unconscious. Huh?
What I'm hearing the difference is in Freud's, it's laid out. There's this type of language in the dream that you can interpret. In BION's, what I'm hearing is it's more intuitive, and you go with the intuitive because then there's no real boundary. You're in reverie with the dreamer, with the person presenting the dream.
Yeah, but it's also how you make the interpretation, because for instance, in this case, for instance, for me, it was making more sense to make her aware of the need that she has to be everything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, using that message in order to make her aware of something that was making her frustrated, because she wanted to, you know.
Well, you can get at it from both ways, but the way you were getting at it, it sounds like, was more intuitively, which means in a way you're more present with the person giving the dream, whereas with Freud's delineation, like cognitive behavioral delineations, they create boundaries, intellectual boundaries, which separate you from the patient, even if the patient's not aware of it.
No, I disagree.
I don't see that.
Well, I don't see that. It's a different tool.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
it's a different tool, but you know, I think the idea of reverie is a tool that is employed by some analysts, and other analysts use different tools.
Well, I don't mean to be putting it down. I'm just saying I'm trying to understand the difference. And I'm wondering if the difference with the intuitive tool is that there is less, there are less compartmental boundaries between the patient and the analyst.
Yeah, but you're talking about two things. But you're talking about listening. How do you listen?
Yeah. Because with using Freud's tools, you're bringing in information. You're bringing in your theory, where BION says, don't bring in theory, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that I can agree with.
Yeah.
Yeah, that you're bringing in your theory of how dreams work, for
And
example.
and that the act of bringing something in actually causes a barrier in one way.
Well, but there are two things. I mean, you can try to understand theoretically how the unconscious work, how dreams work from the point of view of BION and Freud. That's one thing. But another thing is, how do you listen to the material of the patient, and what did you say to the patient that would be meaningful to the patient?
Well, if I could make an analogy between the tango and as a dance where it's more intuitive, right? You don't know what your partner's about to do.
In what?
I always have that feeling.
What?
I never know what my partner's going to do.
There's I can't remember the type of tango, but there's a type of tango in which,
You're talking about tango.
yeah,
Yeah.
the one partner, the partners never know what the other is going to do, but they follow, intuitively they follow. Whereas,
I don't dance.
oh, okay, whereas the ballet is
I have to-
all
I have to do other
predetermined.
things.
The ballet is all predetermined, right? So, if you can make the analogy between Freud's being the ballet and BION's being the tango, you
No,
get
but
you
that's
get a
unacceptable.
dance.
That is unacceptable to me. I don't follow that at all. That's like saying the session is like a preformed ballet. No, not at all.
Oh, okay.
You
Okay.
listen to the patient,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and you listen to the content of the dream. You're intuiting what a symbol or what the dream might symbolize, and as the patient free associates to it, the patient and you get a better feel of it. And then you might say something about the sweater or whatever.
Yeah.
But it is free association, and it's dependent on the patient. It's not preformed. This is like when you began to compare Freudian analysis with CBT. Oh,
No,
and it's preformed.
yeah, no,
No,
I
no.
was comparing it on one point. It's very
I
different.
understand the point you were.
Yeah,
very
it,
good.
it is very different. But Freud did go towards more of a cognitive approach near the end of treatment. He even talked about that. But he started off.
This might
more
have been
yeah.
you're talking about the historical Freud,
Yeah.
or the way modern analysts who describe themselves as Freudian practice. I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm just referring to what you bring into the session
I know,
from the
I know.
theory
The
becomes.
problem is that nobody knows how Freud really worked.
Nobody knows how Freud really works.
No, we only know about Freud from a page of the Rat Man that he did not destroy.
Oh, right.
He destroyed all his notes.
Oh.
So the only note that was left was one page from the Rat Man. And that's all what we know how he worked. And in that page he talks about how he fed the Rat Man, how he offered food, and these type of things. And then he had, I don't remember exactly now because it's a long time I read it. But and the other thing we know is how he worked with Dora, but that was at the very beginning of Freud, with an adolescent that he almost cross-examined the poor girl, trying to, but he was so interested to prove his theories that he really was using his patient because he wasn't aware. I mean, Freud was never analyzed himself, so, I mean, the fact that he had discovered so many things on his own by himself in 1800 is amazing. But his analysis, this is why it's very dangerous to read Freud and how he worked and try to follow. There are people who are completely Freudian, so that you, like Mercer said once to the people in LA, I mean, that they were very, very Freudian, I said, you doing 1800 psychoanalysis. Because the psychoanalysis now is very different from what Freud apparently used to
Yeah.
work.
No, I'm not trying to put Freud down because I think he was a
But you can put him down, it's okay. It's
brilliant
not, no problem.
But I'm just
No,
trying
no,
to.
I know.
The
I'm
problem with Freud, that's regardless, never mind how down you put it, the guy is still up.
Yeah, right.
You know, you can't put him down because I mean, the guy.
Or like a lot of the people, and I've seen this especially in the feminist movement, very critical of Freud.
Yeah, I know.
1890, 1900, not really addressing modern day psychoanalysis,
That's right.
which had its origins with Freud and has
Yeah.
a developmental history.
Absolutely.
Oh, you don't have to sell it to me. I'm just the point I was trying to make is when you bring something in, does it, and when you're thinking about the different concepts of dream analysis from a Freudian perspective, does it take you further away from the patient and what they're saying in that moment that you're doing that? That's all I.
No,
only
the
point
main
I was
difference
trying-
is in dream analysis from a Freudian point of view and from a BIONian point of view, is that for Freud, analysis were always satisfaction of a wish.
Yeah.
And BION say satisfaction of a wish is true, but it's not everything. Because the purpose of the conscience is to reveal the truth. It's a completely different concept. The unconscious reveal the truth that the preconscious will accept or reject. So then, and then whatever is not being digested by the consciousness while you're awake, which is what Freud refers as day residue, is then attempted to be digested by the unconscious while you're sleeping. But it's done in an ecliptic way in order to preserve what Freud say, you're dreaming. I mean, you're sleeping. So the dreams are always created in a way that you're not capable of understanding what is going on, even if you're a psychoanalyst, when you have to really think about it. You have to wait until you're awake and think about it. Because if you were to know exactly, when that happened, then you wake up in fear, you have a nightmare. So, but so the purpose of the dreaming, is not so much to satisfy a wish, but is to reveal the lies, to denounce the lies that the conscience would abide to because of fear of the truth. And you know, the thing is that the Latin knew that because in Latin or in Spanish, mind, which is mente, and lying, which is mentir, have the same root, meaning the conscience is lies. So, anyway, so I want to show you something here. Let me if I get it. So, you will see, those who haven't seen this, yeah.
This is the story of our third birth here at the Elephant Safari Park of a little beggar we named Risky. This is Nikki, our third expectant mother this year at the Elephant Safari Park. We've been waiting now quite a few weeks for her to get round to giving birth. It looks like tonight's the night. The back of her is now swelling up as the baby is moving into the delivery area, and we can just see to the embryonic sac appearing. Nikki's very calm, doesn't seem to be in any distress. She seems to know exactly what's going on. Here we can start to see the main part of the embryonic sac appearing. She's bearing down to try and hold on. Yes, it's really so now. Nikki's just getting herself comfortable. The sac is mostly filled with fluid at the moment. This is purely like a bag of fluid, but here's the baby starting to appear. We can see the hind legs and the tail. Squeezing down, here it comes. And wow, that was very quick. Baby's hit the floor and this stage isn't moving. Incredible. Nikki very delicately steps over the baby there. She's just looking at the baby and checking it out. At this stage, the baby appears to be absolutely lifeless. It's not breathing. She's very worried. And here's when nature is going to take its course. What is she going to do? She's kicking it, which will probably be the equivalent to a human slap on a baby's bum. She's very desperate to get it to move, to breathe, to get it to come to life. We've decided to leave her, to let her sort this out for herself, because she seems to know what she's doing. The baby is still as yet not breathing. first breath from the baby, gasping for air. Just over 2 minutes since the birth. Quite amazing. She seems quite happy with herself now. Nikki is now checking around to make sure everything's there. Now Nikki wants her on her feet. She knows that in the wild there will be predators around. It's very important for her to be up on her feet and standing. As soon as she can stand, as soon as she's safe. The baby's staggering, trying desperately to stand up in this slippery condition she's standing in, but she's up, she's finally up. Now standing. Eyes staring out into this new world. And here they are, the first few tentative steps. Shaking, but walking. Nikki walking with them. All three elephants have had their babies within minutes, very fast, no fuss, no bother, no screaming. Very, very simple. I think elephants know what they're doing and they don't really need a lot of help from us.
So we go to the second part, which is the BION countertransference. You know, one of the confusion that we have with reading to Freud about this thing is that, well, and then what is countertransference? Well, there is the history about countertransference. Countertransference was discovered, at the beginning. I mean, you can read that in Number, the whole history of how at the beginning psychoanalysts were not very happy to be told that they, because of the megalomaniac, inflated ego of the psychotherapy, there's nothing wrong with me. Even Freud make that mistake because he talk about healthy people and neurotics, as if there is some kind of a healthy individual that have no problem, and then the rest who are suffering. But we are, people. So this is why BION's paper on the psychotic and non-psychotic, and generalizing that, well, he is psychotic, which is, I prefer traumatized myself, it makes more sense. But he uses psychotic, non-psychotic as an ubiquitous splitting of the mind that is present in everybody, that meaning that any of us at a given moment can lose it. And then in relation to the time that we lose it, in the intensity, is that we can make a difference. But losing, there is nobody does lose, because everybody have a crazy part. Why? Because we're human. So then, if Lacan say that, Lacan say, think, what a testimony of a spiritual elevation we might express if we reveal that we are made of the same material of those we shape. So, the thing is with countertransference is that BION distinguished two forms of countertransference, which is similar to Gittelson, who wrote a paper in 1952 about the transference of the analyst and countertransference. BION distinguished the two, but the one that is conscious and the one that is unconscious. And also Racker distinguished two, the concordant and the complementary. But I think these three more or less imply the same thing. So for BION, what we experience from the patient and we are aware of is no countertransference. And countertransference and conscience is something that we are not aware of, for which we require more analysis to become aware of what is going on. Because once we become aware, it's no longer countertransference. It's something that we are aware the patient is doing to us, and we know the patient is doing to us. So he said countertransference cannot be used. However, you know, when you read the paper of Hyman, Paula Hyman, mostly, it was a revelation when she in 1950 it created a complete difference of how countertransference was understood at the beginning by Freud. There was an expression of something neurotic in the therapy that required to do further analysis. It was okay, because that's introduced the training. The training was introduced because of countertransference. Therapists need to be trained, need to be treated like a patient, and need to understand what's going on and learn from problem, whatever. And that was in 1926. So, but the Paula Hyman paper, when she say that there is something in the countertransference that allows us to be aware of what is going on. For BION, there is no countertransference, but it's a projective identification the patient is projecting in you, and that you will be used to be aware of what the patient is doing to you, and you can use that for interpretation. What is unconscious requires more analysis, and what is really unconscious is all. Because it's unconscious because you don't know. It's not there until you see it, until it appears. So it comes from the unconscious, and then you have to have faith that the pink sweater might represent something, or the Anthony thing. I mean, whatever you pick up in patient, or when you listen mostly to dream, which is the pure expression of the unconscious, the pure material the unconscious is made of, and then you allow yourself to, without thinking, to capture whatever is there. You're familiar with Racker. I don't want to get into concordant. Okay. Now we can read about this case that anybody want to read? You want to read it? It's in page 185 at the end.
I remember, for instance, the case of Helen, a 33-year-old married woman in analysis for 7 years, referred by her GP because of anxiety, agoraphobia, and suicidal ruminations. She was the eldest of 5 siblings, and her mother, who was adopted, grew up, according to Helen, as a sort of Cinderella, often displacing her own childhood sufferings onto her children in the form of a strict and frequently unfair discipline. At one point, at the beginning of her analysis, Helen remembered how her mother forced her and her siblings to remain in the garden after school until it was time to go to bed, with the excuse that they would dirty and mess the house up if they were to remain inside. From the beginning of the treatment, I started to observe that I had great difficulty concentrating on the material presented by Helen, often finding myself lost in a multitude of associations. During one of her sessions, seconds after lying down on the couch, she started to talk about the difficulty she had in parking her car in front of my house. "It seems that your neighbors are very busy," she said. "I had to wait until your previous patient left to be able to park, and at the end I had to park in front of a garage. I hope I will not be obstructing anybody wanting to get out of the house. I hate to be in somebody's way. I don't really want to interfere." After a long pause, she continued talking about her father-in-law, who discriminates against women, saying that their place is in the house, having children and looking after them. At this particular moment, I started to have fantasies about what to do in order to change some investments to have better dividends, and I also felt that these fantasies were not related to the patient's discourse, because I remembered being previously in a similar predicament, even though the material brought then by the patient was completely different. Becoming aware that I was on the verge of losing the thread of my patient's associations, I tried to concentrate again, but I found it extremely difficult, almost painful. Similar to previous sessions, to give up the mental tactics that I was applying in order to improve my finances. Although the contents of my fantasies were my own, the repetitious need to disconnect from this patient's discourse and the painful difficulty in keeping my concentration on her communication made me wonder whether there was something in the form of a projective identification I was dealing with, but was not then aware of. In other words, I thought they were
Okay, and that's unconscious.
In other words, I thought there were two different issues taking place at the same time. On the one hand, there was a needy element of my own that was concerned with improving my investments, representing my countertransference in BION's terms. On the other hand, there was also an emotional counterpart product of a projective identification that required an investigation in order to understand the true nature of its meaning. My patient spoke about a young sister-in-law who was still living with her parents and was very much emotionally dependent on them. At this moment, it came to my mind that what she had said at the beginning of the session, that there were too many cars in front of my house, and she had to wait until my previous patient left, and that she had parked in front of somebody's garage. I then felt certain that there was a relationship between these aspects of her discourse and my difficulty concentrating. I had the feeling that I was abandoning her, leaving her alone to talk to herself, while I absented myself, as if the interaction between us was very painful. I also thought that there was an important schizoid aspect about her, since I often have the fantasy that I could have abandoned the office without her noticing it. I felt it was like a revelation of something that had been going on in the session for quite some time, without my being able to figure it out. In other words, I thought it was like capturing BION's O. Then I said that I believed she felt threatened by other patients' siblings and their busyness. She imagined I was sharing with them something that made her feel painfully excluded and filled her with anger to the point that she wanted to stop the exit, like parking in front of the garage, of other siblings' patients. That perhaps she felt so threatened by the birth of so many brothers and sisters after her that she might have tried to continuously ignore them. She was silent for a while and then said that not only was she the oldest of all, but she was 5 years older than the brother who was the second eldest, and that there was only 1 year difference between him and the next. She stated, "They were always together, always playing among themselves and never allowed me to participate. I always felt left out." When her sister was born, she remembered thinking that perhaps, since she was a girl, this sister could be a good playmate, but the difference in age was so great that this was impossible. She remembered growing up alone, discriminated against not only because she was the eldest, but also because she was a girl. Her voice at this moment was significantly sad, and I was, unlike at other moments, extremely attentive and receptive of her emotions, listening to her gloomy account about her feeling of exclusion, always lonely and with a considerable amount of envy towards the capacity of her siblings to play with each other. She was talking in a low voice, frequently interrupted by quivers and sudden bursts of crying. She also referred to her own 9-year-old daughter, who was an only child, and to her fear of having other children because she did not wish to expose her daughter to the presence of other siblings, as had happened to her. I thought that my difficulty following her associations was related to a projective identification that attempted to protect her from a painful history of continuous exclusions and mistreatments, of feeling neglected and uncertain, as if she did not have a place of her own, or the right to be. What I experienced in the countertransference was the presence of an absence, the feeling of someone cast off in her own fantasies, which induced again her childhood experience of being left completely isolated without a companion to play with. The next session was the fourth and last of the week. She described in detail her daughter's birthday party, while I struggled again with my tendency to turn to my own fantasies. Then she mentioned, almost at the end of a session where I had remained completely silent, that her doctor, the one who had referred her to see me, had sent me his greetings, and she added with a certain tone I perceived as a kind of reprimand that I should not forget my friends. At this moment I felt present for the first time in the session, and tried to build the interpretation around this issue. I said that she wanted not to forget about me, and that I did not forget about her either, that I had been absent from the whole session without saying anything, that she wanted to make me present, however, since this desire frightened her. She preferred to talk about other things, perhaps because this made her remember painful matters from her infancy. In the next session, she started to talk about her work. with the same previous monotonous details, and again I experienced the same difficulty following her. Suddenly, she became silent and remained like that for a long time. I felt uncomfortable and felt the need to say something. After 20 minutes, I said that it seemed to me that she was very determined to make me present in a way she had never tried before. She agreed, and added that she was feeling the struggle to see who was going to remain silent longer. She also remembered that her mother often would order her around, or give her directions, and that, in reality, her mother did not care if what she ordered was accomplished or not, for it seemed that the important thing for her was to make herself present and to show who the boss was. She continued, "My mother talked to me with the sole purpose of debasing me, as if I did not exist. Then I started to do the same with her, to talk in order to make her disappear, just to say anything in order to get rid of her, so she would leave me alone. I often thought that it was dangerous to try to make her know what I wanted. It was very painful to feel that I meant nothing to her, that I was only someone with whom she could practice being the owner. It was easier to ignore it all and to remain distant." During the next session she saw, through the office window, a cat that was walking through the garden, and expressed that she did not like cats. They are distant, very clean but ungrateful, not very friendly, interested only in what is convenient for them, different from dogs, which are friendly, faithful, and grateful. She remembered a dog she had had when she was a child. This dog always followed her through the garden as she moved inside the house. Every morning it wagged its tail, looking for her attention, like saying good morning. And she talked. I remembered about something she had previously said about her mother forcing her and her siblings outside of the house. She could have felt like the dog, moving around the garden, trying not to be ignored by those that were inside the house, painfully aware and trying not to be forgotten. Then she remembered a dream, and explained that they were really two dreams. In the first dream, she felt a deep feeling of longing, sadness, and nostalgia because her husband was away on a trip. The second dream was related to her work. She was told that her program at work, where she was a supervisor, had changed. The supervision was going to take place during different hours, something she felt was not right for the personnel because it was not providing her with enough time to prepare for it. However, she also thought that this change was convenient for her because it did not interfere with playing tennis. She provided no associations, and I said that it seemed as if the dream was portraying the existence of two different parts in her. One was like a dog part, grateful, aware, friendly, and so on. And another was like a cat part, aloof, distant, ungrateful, and concerned only with her things. That these dog-cat parts were similar to these two dreams, which also seemed to represent both parts, the first dream depicting a dog part, and the second one a cat part. In the first part, she is deeply taken by the absence of her husband, by how important he is for her, and by how much she cares for him. The second part is impersonal and based on insignificant details about what might or might not be convenient. It was similar to what she talked about during the previous session, when, under the influence of the cat part, she attempted to ignore my presence, projecting the dog part, needy and sensitive, in order that she might avoid suffering, or when feeling excluded, I might become like a forgotten dog, and attempt to think about other things, similar to what she said she did, in order to protect herself from suffering, when she felt mistreated or ignored by her mother. Also, she could project the cat part into me, and then we could both become distant and ignore each other, like being and not being together, or trying to make an analysis without really doing it. The problem, perhaps, was the difficulty in allowing us to become the dog part, even if it implies suffering. She approved and started a recount of painful childhood memories about feeling abandoned and ignored, and how she learned to feel numbness in order not to suffer.
Any comments?
Well, what sticks out to me with this is it's a process of two people interacting, and that it takes time to unfold.
Yeah, but
And that there's changes, shifts going on with each session.
I like the use of the use that Dr. Lopez makes of projective identification and understanding the projections in order to understand the patient. So he uses his experience, but it's something that he is trying to understand is induced in him.
Right.
Because I think, you know, these patients that are very detail oriented and monotone in expression can be very difficult to listen to. And so the real information is his experience.
Absolutely. That is unconscious. And it's a countertransference. And you have to work your way to make it conscious to understand what's going on. Because the only thing you have to understand what's going on is are those feelings. Otherwise you can remain like that forever and never know what's going on. It was only until the side, I mean, there's something going on here that I don't understand what it is. And everything starts to unfold.
Yeah, and there's shifts that happen along the way as that happens.
So for you, is are dog and cat like pink in the other tree? In terms of representing or really?
Well, not so much because I got that from her.
Yeah.
Listen,
Well, you got pink from her.
I used the material that she used about what were cat and what were dogs. So then I felt that the cat was a defense. I mean, that the dog part used the cat as a defense, which was indifference, and so she projected the cat in me. I became indifferent myself, and then went on and whatever. Yes.
I have a question just about O in general. On page 10, where you describe a couple of things about Grotstein.
Page 10 at the beginning.
Yeah, yeah, it's the introduction, but there, the definition of O there, it seems that it's, it seems that there's, you have two different ways of dealing with what O is.
Okay, tell me what you read it.
So, O said Grotstein in 1996 with great exactness.
What is that? What is,
Same
paragraph.
that's Grotstein.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like is like Marlowe's description of Tamburlaine Samarkand, always on the horizon, ever distant, always receding. BION introduced us to a cosmic domain that spatially, temporally, philosophically, existentially, existed beyond our sensual capacity to comprehend, although psychotics and mystics have always known of its existence.
Well, that's what she said.
You don't agree with that? That's,
No.
No, okay, good. I didn't think so, but it's there.
I know, but you see, Grotstein, you have to be careful with him. You know, he's a friend, and he thinks that he's the one who was touched by BION because he was the one who was directly analyzed by BION.
Yeah.
I mean, I always argue with him because he was directly analyzed by BION, but I was undirected analyzed because my analysis was analyzed by BION. So, you know, so,
And would
so
you
about who was, but he said, well, yeah, I was analyzed by BION, you were not.
okay, so while we're on Grotstein, would you agree or disagree with his use of the word drive, the implications of a truth drive?
What is that?
Well, that's just the name of an article on page 219 in your bibliography. The Seventh Servant, the implications of a truth drive.
In the page, which page?
219. So it's an article from 2004 by...
And that Grotstein, the seventh servant.
Yeah, the implications of a truth
Implication
drive.
of a truth-driven.
I just wonder what the his use of the word drive. Would you accept that word or probably not?
Implication of truth.
219, it's
Of a
in
truth.
big.
Well, he wrote a paper about that.
Yeah.
I don't agree with that either.
Yeah, I thought so. I'm just trying. Yeah, I thought.
I don't
both-
know.
yeah.
No, I mean, people have the right to say whatever they want.
Okay.
Everybody.
No, in order to understand what you're saying, I wanted to make sure that I was right.
I don't think I think it's too Freudian
Yeah. Okay. Good.
to consider that it's a true drive. I would say perhaps if there is a drive, there is a freedom drive. You know, and moving toward freedom because it's a natural thing to progress and then. But a truth drive is no, because I mean usually we fear truth because the violence of truth. You know, this is why we are born unconscious illiterate. Because nature is giving us the choice that either to learn about truth or not to learn about truth. And this is what psychoanalysis was created as an instrument that allows you to read the truth, to read the unconscious and read the truth if you want to. But if you don't want to, you can remain illiterate about the truth. I mean, like millions of people, which is dangerous in any way. But people have the choice to, because the truth is very violent.
Yes. Well, that's very interesting. I don't know if you'd agree with this, but in that case, the notion of a symptom, the symptom suddenly becomes a very beautiful thing. Because without the symptom, since there's no truth drive, we would never know the truth.
Yeah.
It's only our symptom.
Absolutely. The symptom is the way that the lies reveal.
Mm-hmm.
Because, for instance, I think psychosomatic, we won't have a chance to see that. Psychosomatic is the consequence of the dialogue, a primitive dialogue between the mother and the child that remains unconscious and the person is not revealed. And that dialogue, very primitive, is established between the mother and the body because the child doesn't speak. So the mother relates to the anatomy of the child. And that when that is important because of the mother's incapacity to establish a reverie understanding with the child, for whatever reason, whatever conflict she has, whatever lies she's saying to herself, then that dialogue remains. And then usually between an organ and the unconscious. And that organ is induced to talk, but the organs don't talk. So they produce a symptom. That's, for instance, you can see colitis, for instance. Ulcerative colitis, which is a very common psychosomatic problem, clear very often in psychoanalysis. When one person starts to use the mouth to express electricity using the ass, because the anus, will do many things but never talk. So it's the same thing, organs cannot speak. But when it's used with that purpose, get ill. So then I say that psychosomatic is always the expression of a body repeating a repetitious dream that cannot be dreamed. I don't know so many people will agree with that, but I learned that from a patient, very much from a patient who, this patient brother died before he was born, and then he became, was a candidate. He became that dead patient, and they died from a dysentery. So the mother privileged when this boy was born any anal issues. So she was always aware of the feces and defecation, and so all the anal activity was privileged by the mother, and that remained unconsciously to him, and then translated later in all sorts of pathology, including hemorrhoids and anal fissure and all sorts of things, and even colitis. And through the analysis, one thing he said once is, "I've never been me. I don't know who I am because I've always been somebody who died before." So he said that for his mother, he was always the dead child. He never been himself, and he himself was always that dead child that the mother was talking to in him. So for him was like getting rid, freeing himself finally from that dead brother. It was like a twin, a dead twin. So it was a very interesting thing. But I learned a lot from that. To see that there was a dialogue, a primitive dialogue between the mother and the dead child incorporated in him. And that produced all those things clear after the analysis. Anyway, so we still have time. Any other questions? Everything is clear.
One thing is,
One thing.
this goes back to last week with the negative, when there's something that happens that creates the negative, the negative
Negative link.
links, yeah. And I'm unclear as to the details of that.
The difference between negative and positive link.
What causes the shift?
The interpretation.
But what causes the negative links to form?
The preconceptual trauma will repeat what the interaction that happened between our parents and ourselves, or well, let's say the parents, okay? Our parents and ourselves, which had happened at a certain time of our life, and we keep repeating that.
Okay, so
Between, between inner part of ourselves, between the superego and the ego, the same interaction that was created between us as a child and our parents, it repeated internally between the superego and the ego.
Okay, so the negative link
It's
is
false. It's negative because
Yeah.
it's false. It's not true.
Yeah.
We
So
might not deserve to be treated like that in the way we treat ourselves.
yeah.
Repeating how we were treated before.
Okay, so it also stops the person from living in a way, from
Because even they are
Yeah.
alive because you're repeating over and over
Yeah.
the same thing,
Yeah.
or what happened to you as a child. Because the problem is that we are all born out of ordinary people who trying their best, but they're not. I mean, so this is how will we mark, and how we'll mark our children too, because we are ordinary people too. So, and then in the way that we have been marked, then it becomes repetitious, but it's repeating an emotional interaction that took place between the child and the parents that is repeated internally now. And then it's important to change. I think it's essential. BION don't talk about that. This is mostly my work. He's talk about negative and positive link. The only negative link he refer about in detail is minus K, which you have to, the only way to understand is to consider as a defense that we see in intellectualization, which is a thinking in order not to think. But about minus H, minus L, he didn't say anything. So I considered that minus, for instance, erotic transference is a minus L, and the negative transference is a minus H, because he said minus minus L is not equal to positive H. Have nothing to do. They're emotion that one doesn't. The negative doesn't represent the other. I mean, hate doesn't represent the opposite of love.
okay.
So I gather that the negative represents something false that do not belong to you, and positive is what is related to you according to the interaction that you're taking place. I mean, if I come and push you and you get angry at me, well, that's a positive link, because you're reacting to something that I'm doing to you. But if you're really beating yourself because this is the way it was done to by your parent when you're a child, I mean, you might not deserve that.
Yeah.
So, and I think this is an essential issue to keep in mind in order. And I saw that, I told you that about that movie. You should see that movie of As It Is in Heaven. Because the guy who did that, he might have read BION, because in the first, I will tell you, the first part of the movie, in the 4 minutes, there is a little boy in the field, on a high grass field. All the boys are beating him badly there, the poor guy. And at the end, he masturbates on top of him. I mean, something very degrading. The guy, the little boy's crying, and he goes to the mother, and the mother, trying to comfort him, and this type of thing. And then he grows. When he becomes an adolescent, he sees from the window how the mother hit by a car and killed. And then he was the only child, and he had no father, so he remained alone. But he became a fantastic composer, very well known in the world. And then he retired because he had a heart attack. And he decided to go to that town and buy the school, because he was rich then. He bought the school where he went as a little boy. And the whole meaning of the is a Swedish movie. Is about trying to show the hypocrisy involved in religion. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is the beginning and then the end of the movie, when he's directing a chorus.
We have seen it.
Oh, you have seen it.
Yes, and at the end he has a heart attack. And
He has a heart attack. But while he's having the heart attack and lie down there, did you see remember the image?
no, I don't remember.
Is the image like a shadow. He going to the high field and picking up the little boy, and carrying it with him. With the little boy is him.
Yes, yeah.
He go there and pick up the boy and protect the little boy.
Yeah.
He himself, So I was amazed by that because it really is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And it's a two image. The first one is 4 minutes, and the other one is 5 seconds. So then this is what I'm referring, and I think this is an essential thing to be aware because that's the essence. Well, the repetition compulsion is produced by many things, but that's one of the essence, emotion, from the emotional point of view of the repetition. You're repeating something in the past because you have not been able to work it out.
I have a question going back to your discussion of multiple personality.
Okay.
On page 108.
In which page?
108.
One minute.
To see if I'm understanding
I
this.
can see you read the whole thing. Okay.
Where to start?
What is this chapter about?
It's hard to know where to start.
Projective identity. Okay. I don't remember.
Well,
I read
actually-
this a long time ago. I don't really remember it.
Can I go back a bit earlier, like to 107, if we have time or not? I'll make it like one sentence if we
we
don't.
have 15
All right.
minutes, yeah.
But I don't. Is there anything else anyone wants to?
No,
Okay.
please.
So back to 107. So I think that's
107.
yeah. I think the last paragraph.
Okay.
So I think it sets it up better. And then start a question. I also refer to the inconvenience of discriminating between projector and recipient, because such separation could create the impression that projective identification moves only in one direction, instead of being conceived of as the product of mutuality, moving between two minds in both directions, just as an exhibitionist could induce feelings in a voyeur in the same fashion that the latter could induce desires in the former. The discrimination between projector and recipient can also get confused with the roles of victim and aggressor. For instance, we could interpret the destructive acting out of a delinquent adolescent, projector, against the good desires of his parents, recipient, as an expression of victimization. However, such a belief could impair the investigation from the opposite direction. In other words, the investigation of the unconscious dealings the family might be employing towards the adolescent, who might represent a depository of bad objects expelled by the family. This could be a way to avoid good objects remaining in their minds without facing the danger of being damaged by the badness projected and then acted out by the delinquent acts of the adolescent family. A mutuality such as this could also be observed, so this is the part I was really getting into, but a mutuality such as this could also be observed in what I refer to as iatrogenic, correct? Splitting, a condition present in patients described as having multiple personality disorder. So here's the key sentence I'm trying to understand. In this case, a hysterical patient might present a degree of dissociation and exhibitionistic fantasies that could elicit via projective identification feelings in the therapist that, if counteracted, would result in the creation of different personalities in the patient in a rather progressive circularity, making it difficult to discriminate between who is the projector and who is the recipient. So, yes. Can you say anything about it? I mean, I'm curious. Are you saying that what form would the hysterical patient who's presenting degrees of dissociation and exhibitionistic fantasies, when you say fantasies, are they like multiple people? So the person is like creating drama or entertaining the therapist or creating fictions, and these become more concretely.
No, a patient might be, say, innocent in the expression, and patients use that often as a way to avoid accusations in superego. Say, well, like talking about themselves as if they were somebody else. This is common. A patient using splitting as a form of defense to avoid accusation. But so they talk about different parts. When the therapists start to inquire and they start to provide name, for instance, I mean the little girl and the dog, and then what is the name of the, and things like that. So then the patient starts to capture the desire of the therapist, and they start to provide more parts. And the more part the patient provides, more interested the therapist again, more the more provided, and then you have a multi-personality created by the interest, by the desire of the therapist, and the corresponding complying of the patient, which is what I think happened in multi-personality.
Yeah, some therapists who treat traumatized patients will say, for example,
Everybody's
there is a
traumatized, my dear.
Yeah, but they call themselves people who treat.
Well,
That would, they identify that the patient has had a concrete trauma, like, for example, sexual abuse. And then the patient will come, and let's say that the patient is critical of herself. The therapist will say, there is a harsh mother inside of you that is talking now. And then the patient will talk as a harsh mother, and the therapist will say, and where is that little girl that is being criticized by? I'm looking for the little girl that's being criticized by the harsh mother. And then the patient will say, and here's the little girl. So that's how it starts.
Cynthia, that's wonderful how you put it. Really good, really good. I must say,
That's very good.
very good, very good. Congratulations, very good. Yeah, that's exactly. She expressed it much better than I did. That's the way that work can start, and then at the end you have 25 personalities or whatever.
All with different names.
And of course, it's not very fancy to produce, to provide, and to show in them. Oh, everybody is admiring. How many personalities you have? I might have 20. I'm all like 25. Yeah. So this type of thing. I was watching. I don't know if you ever watched the American funny videos. There were two little girls talking, and one say, "My daddy." They were Asian, something like that. My daddy have a good tooth, a gold tooth. And she would repeat that. My daddy have a gold tooth. And the other one say, and my daddy had diabetes.
Perfect.
So, so this is how I think. I mean, many people hate me because of that. But this is why I really, I have been arguing with many people here.
Of course, yes.
Because of that. Because there are people who really, really believe that this exists and
their client list might. Their client list might be part of people with this. Yeah.
There was something else you were talking about. What was it? Can't remember now. Anything else?
What's for next week?
Okay. For next week, we got the article I give you. Oh, about the preconceptual trauma that you were referring that. You invited. I presented a paper on the 9th. When you are invited, you want to go.
Oh, what day
So,
is that?
well, you know,
It's
because
a
you're regular.
Wednesday. George and I are not in town.
You're not going to be in town.
No, we're not.
Oh my God! I was thinking of you reading my paper. Oh God!
Is that a Thursday?
Wednesday.
I can. Well, you have the paper there. As
Yeah.
well. What I said in that paper, which I think is when you talk about about that, I said there are two forms of trauma. An ubiquitous trauma, which is the preconceptual trauma, the way that we have been traumatized as a child because of the interaction between the helplessness of the child and the power of the adult. And conceptual trauma, which is something that happened at a later age, that is accidental. And it's the one that has been described in psychiatry and psychoanalysis as the post-traumatic stress disorder. So, which I think is a more descriptive psychiatric concept than a metapsychological one. But anyway, reality testing that Freud described, which I think from a BION point of view is part of alpha function, is something that we exercise continuously to discriminate between what is outside and what is inside, what is in the past and what is in the present. It's automatic. But when there is a situation that in some ways triggers emotion from our preconceptual trauma, then that situation could become traumatic. I mean, if it is a situation that is not really intense, it doesn't carry the intensity to break what Freud the protective shield and be traumatic by itself. But continuously on an ongoing basis, we always discriminating in order to protect ourselves from that triggering of the emotion from the past that takes over and fills us with anxiety or uneasiness. When there is a fact, a true fact, that breaks the protective shield, and it's a traumatic thing, mostly it is the preconceptual trauma that provides meaning to the conceptual trauma, because they always interact. I call that, and this is what the paper is about, traumatic entanglement. And I'm using a concept that is present in quantum physics, where they say that two particles, even if they are distant, they interact, but the movement producing one, it interact with the other. So that I use that to describe what continuously we are dealing with, which is this continuous interaction between conceptual trauma that happening now and our preconceptual. Of course, it will depend on the intensity, what happened. I mean, depend on many variables, but it's more something like that.